Hello, lovely people. Welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past.
Dooby 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 doo. Dooby 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 Sophie vlogs.
I've got 5 books to talk about this week, which is quite a lot, so we're going to try and be super duper concise. Always a bold decision. I'm going to kick things off with The Fell of the Dark by Caleb Roehrig. This is a YA vampire novel. I was interested in this because I had heard a lot of comparisons to Buffy. It definitely gives me those vibes, and I do understand. There's like a teenage chosen one, there's like someone who's kind of watching over them, there's like a lot of quips and snark. My main differences being that most people in this are queer and they swear a lot, which is like only improvements from my point of view. So this follows August, also known as Augie, and he lives in a vampire town, and it's like, in this world, but the existence of vampires are acknowledged. He lives in a town that's a bit of a nexus, so there's more vampires than usual, and they're kind of just, like, annoying. There's sort of like a truce arrangement in place where, like, essentially, like, vampires keep their own in order so as not to cause havoc and chaos. And everyone kind of coexists, but not, like, super easily. Augie is having some weird dreams. He may or may not be the chosen one, but that's not necessarily a good thing for him. So there is this rising threat, and there are lots of different factions in this, between both, like, human factions and different vampire factions, and all throughout it is also the fact that Augie is gay and living in this small nexus town, and there are 2 different boys that he might have feelings for. I wasn't sure how I was going to get on with this at first because I'm not a young adult anymore. I'm officially an adult. And so sometimes like popping into young adult books, there can sometimes be this thing where you're just no longer the target audience. So initially when I started reading this, it was very like flippant and quippy and that kind of thing. And I was like, am I going to get on with you? Actually, I've just had such a fun time. I really enjoyed this. One thing I will say is I don't think that this is a flawless book. There are quite a lot of moments where people info dump at Augie to sort of explain their backstories, or like who this faction is, or like who X person is. So you do get like sort of a lot of August listening to people info dump, which could bother some people. Similarly, Augie, because he is out of his depth, he's a teenager, there's a lot of things going on with a lot of people who've had a lot more time than him to prepare for. He doesn't actively make decisions in this until quite late in the narrative. A lot of the time he's kind of just like swept up and going with it. But again, I didn't mind that, because this is one of those books, like, it almost becomes like a running joke that, like, everyone is hiding something from August. And every time there's another reveal, you're like, oh. And it's like, yes, it takes a long time for August to become like an active participant, but that's because it takes a really long time to like understand all of these threads and where everyone stands. So again, it didn't bother me. Another thing I'll say is that the love triangle in this is actually a triangle. There are like 2 boys that August is interested in, but they have history with each other, and I just always appreciate a love triangle that is actually a triangle. It's all very queer. I also liked that in some ways this does go some places towards addressing some of the difficult things that arise when you have like human-vampire relationships. Because there's always a thing that's like, as an adult, I'm like, you're like few hundred-year-old vampire. Why are you interested in like a 16-year-old? I'm like, a child, a baby. This, at the very least, does some way towards addressing concepts to do with, like, consenting to things. There are both, like, explicit consent is given before, like, romantic stuff happening, and also before, like, vampire stuff happening, and in moments where maybe powers are using in ways that might be, like, lowering inhibitions and stuff like this, which does bring up some messy consent stuff, it's addressed, and it's either apologised for, it's discussed explicitly, and I really appreciated that aspect of it, because I think so often there are a lot of sort of supernatural things that are geared towards teens that involve a bit of like overriding of consent or that kind of thing. So I just really appreciated that these were things that were really like actively addressed in this book. I might leave it there because I don't want to give any more spoilers. I will just say there were like a whole bunch of characters in this who I really liked. There was one female character in particular who I absolutely loved. I don't want to do any spoilers, but there were like twists and turns, and I adored them. And I just had such a fun time. So this won't be for everyone. Some people will really not get on with this book. But if you want like just like a fun, fast-paced, quippy queer vampire novel, I had a really great time and I really enjoyed it. Another book that is extremely queer is The Mermaid, the Witch and the Sea by Maggie Tokuda-Hall. This is another one of those books that I thought was middle grade, but is definitely YA. I don't know how I keep doing this. I think I just don't pay enough attention to the world. Or the websites that I'm buying books off shelve things in strange places, because I'm fairly certain this was in the children's book section. This is darker than a middle grade. This is definitely a YA book. This follows Florian / Flora, who is a pirate. Florian is gender fluid. It's initially a situation where it seems like they might just be a girl who disguises themselves as a boy in order to be a pirate, but actually, as this goes on, it is like explicitly like addressed and mentioned, and they are gender fluid. So I will be using they, he, and she pronouns, and Florian and Flora interchangeably in this review, just for your reference. So Flora has like always done what it takes to survive. They come from a very poor background. Her brother and her like have like a really, really close bond, and they joined this pirate ship in order to kind of just like survive. But this is a pirate ship that tricks the passengers and takes them a certain amount of time on their journey, and then they enslave them, and then they sell them as slaves. Enter Evelyn. Evelyn is an upper class girl. She is being shipped off for an arranged marriage onto Florian's ship. Florian is assigned to be Evelyn's bodyguard. What follows is a romance between the two of them, and it makes Florian question all of these life decisions that they have not previously questioned. The world of this is very interesting. Evelyn is very much coded as Japanese. She comes from the upper class within this empire, and it's very much like a world in which this empire is attempting to sort of take over everywhere. Like, there's only a few sets of islands that are still free, and it's really like this, there's a real commentary on this, on like colonialism and imperialism, and the dangers and the damages caused by that. Flora and her brother are black, and they definitely have both been subject to the bad side of this empire, and there's very much like this theme of this, both Florian and Evelyn having lived their lives based upon the whims of the other people in their lives, and then like falling in love and deciding to take matters into their own hands. There are a lot of really good things about this book. I felt like the execution was not quite what it could have been, largely just because there are lots of things happening, and some of the things got a bit lost in a way that I wish that they hadn't. This premise is very dark, and there is a lot of darkness in this. There is like explicit references to someone being raped. There is a lot of violence in this. And one thing that I struggled with, I felt like there's this concept of like Florian being involved in essentially enslaving the people who run on this ship. And Florian spends a lot of the time feeling like they don't really have a choice about what to do because he needs to survive. So he does what he has to do. And later in the text, there is sort of a moment where he kind of like acknowledges and grapples with the fact that like through his actions and inactions, he has enabled the enslavement of many people who did not deserve that. I don't know, for quite a long time in this text, it felt like the only reason he was no longer doing this is because Evelyn was so special, whereas really there is a journey that he has to go on where he has to acknowledge that none of the people who were travelling on this ship deserve to be enslaved. I don't know, that was just a thing which I felt maybe could have been brought in a little bit earlier, because it made me a bit hard to root for them, because you're like, do you really only question this because you like this one? I don't know. This book is also split into 3 sections that are called The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea. I loved in the witch segment, there was this introduction of this magic system, and this magic system that is tied to storytelling and the power that that has. I thought that was such an amazing concept. I loved seeing the way it was done. My sadness is that it wasn't as present in the rest of the text as I'd hoped it would be. It's kind of like used twice and then kind of never used again. And I was a bit sad just because it was such a gorgeous idea, like so fabulous, like this concept, that it didn't feel like it fully got its execution. Some of these things I'm saying, there is going to be a second book, so part of me wonders if these are maybe threads that will get picked up again in a second book, which would be really interesting. It's just from reading it as like a single book and not knowing that it was going to be part of a series, there are these sort of like threads that are kind of used a bit and then they're sort of put down and not really picked back up again, and it made it feel like a little bit disjointed at times. That said, I read this book in like a day or two, like 2 days most. It was so eminently readable. There are some fabulous concepts in this, like this little picture in the background is like these floating islands that were so, like there's so many images in this that are gorgeous. There are so many ideas in this that are fantastic. I would love to see anything else that Maggie Tokuda-Hall does right, because I think she must have like such a wonderful like brain for visuals and stuff. It's just that sometimes this like split story structure, not all of it came together as a whole for me. But I had a really fun time. This is another one where like there's a lot of queer characters in this. Like one character who I wish we had more of is the Pirate Supreme, who is this like non-binary pirate character who is like allied with the sea, which is very cool. So yeah, almost the case that there is just so much cool things in here that not all of it got a chance to shine properly, and I wish that some of it did. The next book is Doing Time by Jodi Taylor. I'm a big Jodi Taylor fan. I really enjoy the Chronicles of St. Mary's. This is sort of an offshoot of that. So the Chronicles of St. Mary's is about time-traveling historians who do like historical research using these pods and stuff like this. This is following the Time Police, that is an organisation that was set up due to the discovery of time travel. A lot of people tried to change a lot of things. There were these big time wars. Time Police was set up to sort of stop all of this anarchy. And it's interesting because the Time Police are very much an antagonistic figure in the Chronicles of St. Mary's, because they're often the bad guys, and there have been like some clashes between them. So to then have that as our setting in this is interesting to sort of compare to like the St. Mary's that we know. This is following 3 characters, one of which is the child of the main characters of the Chronicles of St. Mary's series. So that was fun because it kind of roots you in some familiarity because you kind of know what that guy's like. So that's Matthew. Luke is kind of very much like spoiled rich kid whose daddy has cut him off, so now he's had to sign up to the Time Police. And then Jane is like a very timid woman who has sort of signed up to the Time Police out of necessity because she doesn't know where else to go, and she's really like finding herself. This did what every Jodi Taylor book does, is I just had such a fun time. I find her very fun to read. We have like a rollicksome time, and it's all great. In some ways, it's almost like this was 2 narratives, because there was a whole narrative portion where we're like, they're this team, they're kind of viewed as the weirdos, the rest of the Time Police don't really trust them. There's this really interesting sort of tussle going on between like the old ways of the Time Police that are now very outdated, and then this concept of like what the new Time Police might be, who gets to shape that? Is there a place for this motley crew within that? And that was a really interesting sort of like struggle. You reach a point in the narrative where like an event happens, and then the tone and the style kind of changes. Like we throw ourselves into sort of a different storyline. That was fun. It was kind of one of those instances where I was like, if you guys just spoke to each other before impulsively doing things wouldn't happen. There was a trope in this which has happened before in the Chronicles of St. Mary's, which I don't super love, where there is like a female character who is like the bitch, who very much has it out for your other main female character and is manipulating all of the men, and that's a trope that I'm never super keen on myself anyway. It just kind of annoys me, and especially because it very much felt like a repeat of Isabella Barkley, just like with different levels of like stakes at play. So I wasn't so enamoured when that became an element, because A, it's not my favourite thing anyway, and B, I've definitely seen it in this series before. So there were like a few elements like that where I felt like I'd kind of already seen that done, especially within this series. So, but on the whole, I did have a really fun time. I always do. It was nice to sort of have like St. Mary's pop up. I was like, oh hey guys. And I will definitely be continuing with this series. It's a favourite between me and my mum. She lends me the books and we really enjoy reading them and talking about them together. It's just like, I think I was really interested in this sort of concept of like, how do we reimagine the time police and that kind of thing. And so then when we veered off and did something a bit different, I was like, this is fine. I'm having a fun time. It's just, it wasn't quite as engaging to me. But yeah. Finally, I'm only briefly going to talk about these other two books, but I did finish The Chronicles of Narnia, and I read The Magician's Nephew and The Last Battle. This is a reread. You will know if you've been watching my other book chats that I've been having, like, strongly mixed feelings about this. The Magician's Nephew was always one of my favourites when I was a kid, and I don't really know why. I always quite liked as a kid things that sort of show you the origins of things that you already know, or like backstories of people. That was always just something that I really enjoyed. So I enjoyed that aspect of it, of like understanding how Narnia came to be. One thing I did find really interesting is there kind of is this like, there's always a Christian allegory element in these, and in this one there's almost like this sort of like gender flipped Garden of Eden kind of style thing, which was interesting. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars because, frankly, I had a perfectly fun time with it. I do still like this concept of, like, how Narnia came to be, where the witch comes from. Like, that world is so interesting to me. Sort of like the chaos caused by her coming into our world. All of those things. Perfectly fun, and I enjoyed. This one, The Last Battle, I gave 1 star because I thought it was horrendously bad. Racist, sexist, just generally terrible. I did not enjoy this one at all, and I'm gonna be getting rid of it for sure. So I don't even have a lot to say about this. I just think a lot of the stuff that was very like coded and hinted at in other books really came to the front in this book, and I don't know how I didn't notice any of it when I was a child. So yeah, that's an end to my Narnia reread. I've not really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the first book as Magician's Nephew, and all the other ones haven't quite done it for me. I think the thing is that I now feel is that I think that C.S. Lewis comes up with some gorgeous images and concepts. I don't like how he executes them, and that's fine. A gazillion people love the Narnia books. It will be okay. It's just, this has been one of those rereads that's really, like, made me realise that I don't like the thing that I thought that I liked. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say on those. I don't want to go into them for very long. I would love to hear your thoughts, not just on like the Narnia series, but any of these other books. Have you read them? I would love to hear your thoughts on them. But otherwise, I hope you're having a really lovely day. I will see you next time for something different.